Good evening, and welcome to Tuck and Tales, a quiet place at the edge of the night, where the rain falls gently against old windows, where candles glow softly on forgotten pages, and where every story is told slowly enough to let the world grow still. Tonight, find a comfortable place beneath the blankets. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing become calm. Let the noise of the day drift farther and farther away. Because tonight's story begins in old London, beneath a sky full of rain, on a narrow street where gas lamps shimmer in the fog, and where a small silver locket has vanished without a trace. A locket may seem like a little thing, something light enough to rest in the palm of a hand, something small enough to hide inside a pocket. But some small things carry great weight. A memory, a promise, a secret, a love that time could not bury. And tonight, a quiet detective named James Holmes will follow that missing locket through the sleeping city, from antique shops and old music halls to misty bridges, forgotten railway platforms, and rooms where the past has waited patiently for someone to listen. So close your eyes now and let the story carry you into the rain. This is the tale of The Lost Locket of Blackthorn Street. After all, these are the stories that tuck you in. London was beautiful in the rain, not the bright London shown in postcards, not the grand London of Parliament towers, royal carriages, and crowded morning streets, but the quieter city that appeared only after midnight. A softer London, a hidden London, a London of glowing windows and wet cobblestones, where horse hooves passed like distant memories, where the Thames moved dark and silver beneath low bridges, and where every alley seemed to hold the echo of some story not yet finished. It was on such a night, late in October, that James Holmes first came to Blackthorn Street. The hour was nearly 9:30. The shops of the district had closed. The last customers had gone home, and the rain, which had begun at dusk as a mist, had thickened into a steady silver curtain that blurred the lamps and softened the edges of the world. James Holmes stood beneath the striped awning of a closed bookshop, looking down the narrow street. He was a tall man in his early 40s, dressed in a dark wool coat and a gray scarf. His hat was pulled low against the rain. In one hand he held a folded letter, in the other a walking stick with a silver handle worn smooth by years of use. Most people who met James Holmes noticed his calmness first. He did not hurry. He did not interrupt. He did not speak more loudly than necessary. He moved through the world like a man listening to music only he could hear. There were detectives in London who solved cases by force, by accusation, by pressure, by frightening the truth out of people. James Holmes did not. He believed the truth was rarely frightened into appearing. The truth, he often said, was more like a shy animal. It came forward only when the room was quiet enough. And so, James Holmes had built his reputation not on dramatic arrests or newspaper fame, but on listening to what people said, listening to what they avoided saying, listening to floors that creaked, doors that stuck, clocks that ran slow, letters that smelled faintly of certain perfumes, and footsteps that told a story long before their owner began to speak. The letter in his hand had arrived that morning, It was written in careful, nervous handwriting. Dear Mr. Holmes, I do not know whether this matter is worthy of a detective, but I do know that I am frightened. Something has vanished from my father's shop, a silver locket. It belonged to my mother, and it was kept locked away upstairs. No window was broken. No lock was forced. No servant entered. No customer went above. And yet the locket is gone. There is one more thing. A gentleman came to the shop 2 weeks ago and described the locket perfectly, although I had never shown it to him. He said it contained music, and he said that one day it would be taken back. Please come after closing if you can. Yours sincerely, Eleanor Bellamy. Bellamy, Soane's Antiques, Blackthorn Street. James had read the letter 3 times. The first time, he noticed the fear. The second time, he noticed the phrase, taken back. The third time, he noticed something more delicate. There was no ink blotting anywhere on the page, except beneath the word mother. That told him the writer had paused there, not because she was uncertain, but because she was grieving. Now, standing in the rain outside Bellamy and Sons, James folded the letter neatly and slipped it back into his coat pocket. The antique shop stood at the far end of Blackthorn Street. It was a narrow building of dark brick and old glass, squeezed between a tailor's workshop and a watch repairer. Above the door hung a wooden sign painted in fading gold letters. Bellamy and Sons, Antiquities, Curiosities, Estate Goods. The sign swung gently in the rain. Behind the front windows, warm light glowed over shelves crowded with objects from other lives. A brass telescope, a pair of porcelain swans, a stack of leather-bound diaries, a cracked violin case, silver picture frames, an ivory-handled brush, a collection of pocket watches, all stopped at different times. James crossed the street slowly. His boots made soft sounds in the rainwater gathered between the stones. As he approached the shop, he glanced once at the upper windows. Dark, no movement. Yet one thing caught his attention. The left curtain on the second floor was caught slightly open. Not much, only an inch, but enough for a person inside to look out. James raised his hand and knocked. The door opened almost at once. A woman stood in the doorway. She was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair pinned loosely behind her head and tired eyes made gentler by worry. She wore a deep green dress and a small gold brooch shaped like a bird. Behind her, the shop glowed with firelight. "Mr. Holmes?" she asked. James removed his hat. "Miss Bellamy." Her expression changed with visible relief. "You came. You sounded as though you needed someone to come." She stepped aside. "Please, come in." James entered. A small brass bell chimed above the door. Warm air surrounded him immediately. The shop smelled of cedar, polished wood, old paper, fireplace smoke, and the faint floral sweetness of jasmine tea. It was the sort of room that seemed to contain 100 beginnings. Every shelf had an object. Every object had a past. And every past, James thought, had at least one secret. Eleanor closed the door and turned the lock. "I apologize for asking you to come so late. The late hour is often friendlier to the truth," James said. She gave a small, uncertain smile. "Would you like tea?" "Later, perhaps. First, the locket. At that, the little smile vanished. Eleanor led him toward the back of the shop, where a fire burned low in a black iron grate. Beside it stood 2 chairs. Between them rested a small table with a teapot, 2 cups, and an untouched plate of biscuits. She had prepared for him, but she had been too anxious to eat. James noticed that and said nothing. He sat. Eleanor sat opposite him. For a few moments, only the ticking of the clocks filled the room. There were many clocks in Bellamy & Sons. Tall clocks, mantel clocks, travel clocks, tiny decorative clocks hidden beneath glass domes. None of them agreed on the hour. The sound was strangely comforting, a soft, uneven chorus of time passing. James opened his notebook. "Tell me about the locket." Eleanor looked into the fire. "It belonged to my mother. Her name was Clara Bellamy. She died when I was 12. I am sorry. She was kind, very quiet. She used to sing while repairing small things in the shop. Music boxes, clocks, little mechanical toys. Look, and the locket was hers?" "Yes. She wore it every day." "What did it look like?" "Silver, oval, not large, roses engraved around the edge. There was a tiny winding key on the side. Come, come, because it played music." Eleanor looked up quickly. "So I wrote." "You did?" "Yes. It plays a melody, only a few notes, soft and old. I have never heard the song anywhere else." "What was inside?" "A photograph." "Of your mother?" Eleanor shook her head. "Not only her." James waited. She clasped her hands together. "There were 2 photographs, one of my mother, one of a man I never knew." "Your father?" "No." Her voice lowered. "My father hated the locket." James wrote that down. "Hated it?" "He would never touch it. After Mother died, he placed it in a wooden case and locked it away upstairs. He told me it was too painful to look at." "But you did not believe him." Eleanor's eyes flickered. "I was 12. I believed whatever he told me. But later, no. I came to understand there was more." "What made you think so?" "Because the one time I asked him about the man in the photograph, he grew terribly pale." "And what did he say?" "He said, 'Some names are better left asleep.'" The fire cracked softly. Rain whispered against the front windows. James looked toward the staircase at the back of the room. "And where was the locket kept?" "In my father's upstairs office, locked in a rosewood box inside his desk." "Who had the key?" "I did." "Only you?" "Yes." "Where do you keep it?" "On a chain around my neck while the shop is open. At night, in my bedside drawer." "Was the key stolen?" "No." "Copy it?" "I do not see how. It has never left me." James considered this. "And yet the box was opened." "Yes." "With no damage to the lock." "Yes." "Was anything else taken?" "No, nothing." "And the photograph?" "What do you mean?" "Was the photograph taken with the locket?" "The whole locket vanished." James nodded. "Now tell me about the gentleman." Eleanor's face changed. "Some fears are sharp, like a cry. Others are quiet, like cold air entering a room." The mention of the gentleman brought the second kind. "He came on a Tuesday afternoon," she said, 2 weeks ago. It had been raining then, too. He wore a black coat and a dark blue scarf. Thin, elderly, very pale. His hair was white, but not untidy. His gloves were new. His shoes were old. James smiled faintly. "You noticed the shoes. I grew up in an antique shop, Mr. Holmes. One learns that age and value do not always match." "Very true. What did he want?" "At first, nothing. He wandered through the shop and looked at music boxes. Then he asked whether my father was still alive." "By name?" "Yes," he asked. "Does Mr. Arthur Bellamy still keep the shop?" "And what did you say?" "I told him my father had passed away 3 years ago." "How did he react?" "He closed his eyes for a moment." "Grief?" "I thought so. Or guilt." James wrote the word guilt. Then he asked if my mother's locket was still here. "And you had not mentioned it." "No." "Did he say her name?" "Yes." James looked up. "He knew your mother?" He said, "Clara always loved small music." The clocks continued ticking. Eleanor's voice softened. "I asked who he was. He did not answer. He only said that the locket did not belong behind the lock." "What did you say?" "I told him it belonged to me." "And then?" He looked at me strangely, not angrily, sadly. "His exact words?" Eleanor thought for a moment. He said, "Then I hope it finds its way to the person who can forgive it." James was still. Some sentences are made of information. Others are made of sorrow. This one, he felt, was the second. "And after that?" "He bought a broken music box." "What kind?" "A small walnut box with a painted lid. It did not play properly." "Did you repair it?" "No, I sold it as it was." "Did he pay in cash?" "Yes." "Did he touch anything near the office key?" "No." "Did he go upstairs?" "No. I never allow customers upstairs." James closed his notebook. "Now, if you please, I would like to see the office." Eleanor stood. Her hand moved instinctively to her throat, where the key hung on a narrow chain. James noticed. It was a small brass key, worn and old-fashioned. No scratches near the teeth. No sign of recent copying with wax. Unless she herself was involved, the key had likely remained safe. And James did not yet believe she was involved. The staircase to the upper floor was narrow and steep. As they climbed, the sounds of the shop below grew softer. The clocks became distant. The fire became aglow. The rain became clearer. At the top was a short hallway with 3 doors. Eleanor pointed. "My bedroom, storage room, office." The office door was locked. She used the brass key to open it. The room smelled of dust, ink, and old ledgers. James stepped inside. A small desk stood near the window. Against the wall were shelves of account books. A portrait of Eleanor's father hung above a filing cabinet. Arthur Bellamy had been a stern-looking man with a heavy brow and a beard trimmed with military precision. James looked at the portrait for several seconds, then at the desk, then at the window. The window was closed and latched from within. The latch was dusty, undisturbed. No one had entered from outside. The floorboards were old but clean. A faded rug lay beneath the desk. There was a fireplace, unused for many years, sealed with an iron plate. On the desk sat a rosewood box, beautifully made, small enough to hold in one hand. Its lid was open. Inside was a red velvet lining, pressed into the oval shape where the locket had rested for years. James bent over it. "May I?" Eleanor nodded. He lifted the box, examined the lock. No damage, no scratching, no forced entry. Then he smelled it. Eleanor looked surprised. James set the box down. "Lavender oil," he said. "I beg your pardon?" "The box smells faintly of lavender oil. My mother used lavender soap. This is fresher." Eleanor frowned. "I have not put anything on it." James examined the desk. 3 drawers on each side. 1 central drawer, all locked. Eleanor opened them one by one. Papers, receipts, account books, a pipe, old sealing wax, a tin of buttons. Nothing unusual. Then James crouched and looked beneath the desk. There, almost invisible against the shadow, was a single pale thread. Not red, not black, pale blue. He removed a pair of tweezers from his coat and lifted it carefully. Eleanor leaned closer. "What is it?" "Silk thread." "From clothing?" "Perhaps. Or from lining." He held it near the lamp. The thread shimmered. "Very fine. Not from anything cheap." He placed it in a paper envelope. Then he turned toward the window. Outside, Blackthorn Street lay wet and dark below. The curtain was slightly parted, the same curtain he had noticed from the street. James touched it gently. There was a mark on the fabric, a small smudge, gray-black. "Soot," he murmured. "From the fireplace?" "The fireplace is sealed." He moved to the sealed fireplace. The iron plate was dusty, but one corner, only one, had been disturbed. James knelt. At the bottom edge of the plate, where it met the floor, he saw something. Not an opening. Not quite. A narrow gap, barely wider than the edge of a coin. He ran his fingers along the floorboards. One board shifted. Eleanor gasped softly. James pressed again. The board lifted. Beneath it was darkness, a hidden channel, not large enough for a person, but large enough for a hand, or a tool, or something smaller. James reached into the space carefully. His fingers touched dust, wood, and then paper. He withdrew a folded scrap. It was old, brittle, yellowed at the edges. Eleanor covered her mouth. "What is it?" James unfolded it carefully near the lamp. There were only 4 words written on it. Not in Eleanor's handwriting, not in her father's. In a fine, sloping hand. "Forgive me, Clara." Eleanor said nothing. The rain tapped softly against the glass. James studied the note. The ink was old, very old, decades perhaps. "This was hidden before the locket vanished," he said. "How do you know?" "The dust line. It has rested here a long time." Eleanor looked pale. Was it from him, the gentleman? Perhaps. But how did the locket disappear? James looked again at the hidden space beneath the floorboard. "I do not yet know." He stood slowly. "But I know this much." Eleanor looked at him. "The person who took your locket knew your father's office better than a stranger should." They returned downstairs. The fire had sunk lower. The shop seemed different now, not more frightening, but deeper As if each object had leaned closer to listen, Eleanor made tea with slightly unsteady hands. James accepted a cup and sat beside the hearth. For several minutes, he said nothing. This was one of his habits. He allowed a room to settle after discovery. People often rushed to fill silence with explanation, and explanations, when frightened, revealed more than questions. At last, Eleanor spoke. "My father built the hidden space, didn't he?" "Most likely." "Why? To hide something, or to pass something secretly from one place to another." "From where?" James looked toward the ceiling. The gap ran beneath the fireplace wall. There may be an old service shaft between buildings. The building next door? The watch repairer? Yes, Mr. Vale's shop. James set down his tea. "Tell me about him." "Mr. Samuel Vale. He repairs clocks and watches. He has lived next door since before I was born." "Does he know the office layout?" "He and my father were friends once." "Once?" Eleanor looked toward the window. "They stopped speaking years ago." "Why?" "I don't know. My father never explained." "Mr. Vale still sends flowers to my mother's grave every spring." James smiled slightly. "Interesting. There is something else," Eleanor said. James waited. "On the night the locket vanished, I heard music." "In the shop?" "No, upstairs." "What time?" "A little after midnight." "What kind of music?" "The locket's melody." James leaned back. "You heard the locket playing upstairs, after it had already disappeared?" "Yes." "Where were you?" "In my bedroom." "Did you investigate?" "I opened the office door." "And?" "The box was open. The locket was gone. But the music was still playing." "From where?" Eleanor looked toward the back wall. "Inside the wall." James said nothing for a moment. Then he stood. "I believe it is time to visit Mr. Vale." Samuel Vale's watch repair shop stood immediately beside Bellamy and Sons. Its sign was smaller: Vale clocks and watches. Repairs, cleaning, restoration. The shop was closed, but a light burned within. James knocked. No answer. He knocked again. From inside came a shuffle of movement. Then a bolt slid back. The door opened. Samuel Vale was a small, elderly man with a narrow face, round spectacles, and hands marked by years of delicate work. His waistcoat was covered in tiny pockets. A jeweler's lens hung from a cord around his neck. He looked at Eleanor first, then at James. For a moment, something passed across his expression. Recognition? Alarm? Weariness? "Miss Bellamy," he said quietly, "is something wrong?" "The locket is gone," Eleanor said. Samuel Vale closed his eyes. A long silence followed. James watched him carefully. The old man did not look surprised. That was important. He looked saddened. That was more important. "May we come in?" James asked. Samuel Vale stepped aside. His shop was filled with time. Clocks hung on every wall. Pocket watches lay open on velvet trays. Tiny gears and springs were arranged in neat rows beneath glass. A lamp burned on the workbench. Near it sat a music box. Walnut wood, painted lid, broken hinge. James recognized the description immediately. "The gentleman's music box," he said. Samuel Vale looked at him. "What gentleman?" The pale man who visited Miss Bellamy 2 weeks ago. Samuel Vale's fingers tightened slightly. I do not know who you mean. James moved toward the workbench. You repaired this music box. I repair many things. This one was purchased from Bellamy and Sons. Silence. James turned the music box gently. May I? Samuel Vale hesitated, then nodded. James opened the lid. Inside was a small brass cylinder. Several teeth were missing from the comb. The mechanism had been repaired recently, very carefully. James wound the key. The box began to play. Softly, slowly, only a few notes. Eleanor gasped. That melody. The music was delicate and melancholy. Not sad exactly. More like a memory returning from far away. James listened until it ended. Then he looked at Samuel Vale. You knew Clara Bellamy. Samuel sat down slowly. Yes, you knew the man in the photograph. Samuel looked sharply at Eleanor. She knows? I saw the picture once, Eleanor whispered. When I was young. The old watchmaker lowered his head. Yes, he said. I knew him. His name? James asked. Samuel stared at the workbench. Thomas Ashford. Eleanor repeated the name softly. Thomas Ashford. James watched her face. Names have power. Even unfamiliar names can rearrange a room. Who was he? She asked. Samuel took off his spectacles and wiped them with a cloth. A musician. A thief? James asked. Samuel gave a tired smile. No, though Arthur Bellamy called him worse. My father hated him? Your father feared him. Eleanor sat in a chair near the counter. Why? Samuel looked at James, as if asking permission to open an old door. James nodded once. The watchmaker spoke slowly. Your mother, Clara, was not born to this shop. She came here as an apprentice when she was 17. She repaired small mechanisms, music boxes, automata, jewelry clasps. She had extraordinary hands, gentle, precise, patient. Eleanor's eyes filled with quiet attention. Thomas Ashford came often. He was a violinist at the Ember Hall Theater near Covent Garden. Not famous, not rich, but talented. He brought instruments and music boxes for repair. Clara repaired them. Then he brought them, even when they were not broken. A faint smile touched Samuel's face. They fell in love. Eleanor looked down. My father? Arthur Bellamy was already courting Clara. Did she love him? Samuel's silence answered first. Then he said, not at first. The clocks ticked all around them. Arthur was practical, stable. He promised security. Thomas promised music. Clara was young, but not foolish. She chose Arthur because her family needed money, and Arthur could give her a home. But she never stopped caring for Thomas. Eleanor whispered, the locket. Thomas made it for her, Samuel said. James lifted his eyes. He made it? With my help, Samuel replied. I made the mechanism. Thomas chose the melody. Clara engraved the roses herself. And the photographs? One of Clara, one of Thomas, hidden inside. Eleanor closed her eyes. So my father locked it away because he was jealous. Samuel's voice grew softer. Partly, but not only. James noticed the way the old man looked toward the back wall. There was more. Tell us about the hidden passage, James said. Samuel turned pale. Eleanor looked at him. What passage? Samuel Seahid. These buildings were once one property. In the early days, small goods were passed through a service channel between workshops. Your father discovered it. He used it to store private things. And someone used it to take the locket, James said. Samuel shook his head. No, James waited. I did not take it. I did not say you did. But you thought it. I think many things. I believe few of them until the room gives me permission. Samuel looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood and went to a cabinet. From a drawer, he removed an envelope, old, sealed with cracked red wax. He handed it to Eleanor. This was left with me by your father. Eleanor stared at it. When? 3 years ago. 1 week before he died. My father gave this to you? Yes. Why did you never tell me? He made me promise to wait. Until when? Samuel looked at the music box. Until the locket played again. The room became very still. Eleanor broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter. She unfolded it. But after reading only the first line, she covered her mouth and lowered it. I can't. James gently took the letter. May I? She nodded. He read aloud in a calm voice. My dear Eleanor, if you are reading this, then the past has returned in one form or another. I have done many things in my life that I justified by calling them protection. Protection of my wife, protection of my child, protection of my name. But many wrong things hide themselves beneath respectable words. Your mother loved music before she loved me, and perhaps she loved music because it allowed her to love freely in a world that expected obedience. There was a man named Thomas Ashford. I hated him, not because he was cruel, but because he was kind, not because he stole your mother, but because he never tried to. That was the unbearable part. He loved her quietly, and she loved him in the same way. When Clara married me, Thomas left London. I told myself I had won. But love is not a contest, Eleanor, and a heart is not a room from which one person may simply remove another. Years later, Thomas returned. Your mother was ill by then. He did not come to take her from me. He came because she had written to him. She wanted to hear the melody once more, the melody in the locket. I refused. I locked the locket away. I told myself it would hurt her. The truth is, it hurt me. Your mother died without hearing it again, and I have carried that silence ever since. There is more. Thomas left one final letter for Clara, but I never gave it to her. I hid it. I hid it because I was small, because grief made me selfish, because I wanted the dead to belong to me alone. If the locket has gone, then perhaps it has gone to find what I refuse to return. Forgive me if you can. Your father, Arthur Bellamy. When James finished reading, no one spoke. The only sound was the clocks. Eleanor stared at the floor. Samuel Vale stood with one hand resting on the workbench. His face looked older than before. At last, Eleanor whispered, Where is Thomas Ashford now? Samuel did not answer. James did. He is the pale gentleman. Eleanor looked up. James continued. He came to the shop because he knew your father had died. He asked about the locket because he wanted to know whether Clara's memory had been released from that locked room. Samuel nodded slowly. Yes. Where can we find him? Samuel took a folded paper from his waistcoat pocket. I hoped you would ask. The address led them south, toward the river. The rain had softened to mist by then. London seemed half asleep. James, Eleanor, and Samuel walked beneath black umbrellas through streets glistening with lamplight. The city at that hour felt like a painting made of shadow and gold. They passed shuttered bakeries, a sleeping flower stall, a policeman standing beneath an archway, a woman carrying a basket of laundry through the mist. Somewhere, a dog barked once and then thought better of it. Eleanor walked silently between the two men. James did not press her to speak. He understood that she was not merely walking toward Thomas Ashford. She was walking toward a version of her mother she had never known. Parents are strange countries to their children. We live beside them for years. We learn their habits, their voices, their tempers, their favorite cups, their footsteps on the stairs. And yet, beneath all that, there is always a hidden land. The person they were before us, the dreams they gave up, the names they never said. Tonight, Eleanor Bellamy was approaching that hidden country. The address was a narrow boarding house near the Thames, not far from the old warehouses. A dim lantern burned above the door. Inside, the landlady, a round-faced woman in a shawl, looked at the visitors with suspicion until James gave his card. "Mr. Ashford is ill," she said. "How ill?" James asked. "Some days he speaks. Some days he only listens." "To what?" She looked toward the stairs. "Music that isn't playing." They climbed to the third floor. At the end of a corridor was a small room. The landlady knocked. A weak voice answered. "Come in." Thomas Ashford sat by the window in a worn armchair. He was thin and pale, exactly as Eleanor had described. His white hair fell neatly across his brow. A dark blue scarf rested around his shoulders. On the table beside him lay a violin case, closed, dusty, unused for a long time. When he saw Eleanor, his face changed. For one extraordinary moment, youth crossed it like sunlight passing over water. Then it was gone. "You are Clara's daughter," he said. Eleanor stood in the doorway. "Yes." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I thought so." James stepped inside. "Mr. Ashford, I am James Holmes." The detective. "Yes." "Then the locket is gone." James watched him. "You knew it would vanish?" Thomas gave a faint smile. "I hoped it would be found." "That is not the same thing." "No." Eleanor entered slowly. "Did you take it?" Thomas looked at her directly. "No." "Did you want to?" "Yes." The honesty seemed to steady her. "Why did you come to the shop?" "To see whether Arthur had destroyed it." "He did not." "No. He was not that kind of man." "You say that kindly." Thomas turned toward the dark window. "Age makes kindness easier. It arrives too late, but still, it arrives." James sat across from him. "Tell us what happened." Thomas looked at Samuel. "You told them?" "Arthur's letter did." "Ah." For a moment, Thomas closed his eyes. Then, in a voice soft as old paper, he began. "I met Clara Bellamy when I was 23. I had a violin, 2 coats, and the foolish belief that music would feed me. She was working in her uncle's repair shop then, before Arthur bought it. I brought her a music box that had stopped playing. She listened to it for 5 seconds and told me I had overwound it because I was impatient. Despite herself, Eleanor smiled faintly. That sounds like her. She had a way of seeing the truth without making you ashamed of it. Thomas looked at his hands. I loved her. I loved her in the way young men love, which is to say, completely and without wisdom. But Clara had responsibilities. Her family owed money. Arthur Bellamy offered security. I offered songs. He smiled sadly. Songs are beautiful things, Miss Bellamy, but they do not pay rent. Eleanor lowered her eyes. She married my father. Yes, and you left. I tried to, but I remained in London for a time. I played at Ember Hall. Clara and I never betrayed Arthur, not in the way people whisper about. We wrote letters. We spoke, sometimes. We remembered who we had been. And the locket? I made it before her wedding, a farewell gift. Samuel helped with the mechanism. Clara engraved the roses. I placed inside it the melody I had written for her. What was it called? Thomas looked at Eleanor. The Street Where Rain Remembered. The room seemed to soften around the title. Did my mother love my father? Eleanor asked. Thomas took a long breath. Yes. She looked surprised. She did. Not as she loved me, not as she loved music, but love is not a single language. Your father gave her a home. He gave her you. She cared for him, truly. Eleanor's face trembled. Then why did he hate you? Because he thought love had only one shape. James leaned forward. You returned when Clara was dying. Thomas nodded. She wrote to me. She said she wanted to hear the locket once more. I went to the shop. Arthur refused to let me see her. I left a letter for her. He said he would give it, but he did not. No. And now the locket is missing. Thomas turned toward the violin case. I received a note 3 nights ago. James's eyes sharpened. From whom? I do not know. Where is it? Thomas lifted a folded paper from the table and handed it to James. The note was brief. If you want Clara's song returned, come where the last applause fell. No signature. James read it twice. The last applause, he said. Ember Hall Theater, Thomas whispered. Samuel drew in a breath. That place closed 20 years ago. James looked at Thomas. Did you go? I tried. I reached the street outside. My strength failed me. And the locket? I have not seen it. James held the note near the lamp. The handwriting was careful, disguised. But the paper had a smell. Lavender oil. The same scent as the rosewood box. James looked at Eleanor. Someone wants us to go to Ember Hall. Who? She whispered. James folded the note. That is what we must discover. Ember Hall Theater stood behind Covent Garden, hidden down a narrow lane where posters, once bright with color, now peeled from brick walls. In its prime, it had hosted singers, violinists, comedians, magicians, and actors whose names had long since disappeared from memory. Now it was abandoned. Its grand doors were boarded. Its lamps were dark. Rainwater gathered beneath the ticket window. A faded sign still hung above the entrance. Ember Hall. Music, drama, entertainment. Samuel carried a lantern. James carried his walking stick. Eleanor stood before the old theater and looked upward. My mother came here? Thomas had been too weak to accompany them, but his words traveled with them. "Yes," he had said. "She sat in the third row, left side, whenever I played." James found a side door near the alley, locked, but old. Samuel studied it. "I may be able to open that." James stepped aside. The watchmaker removed a thin tool from his pocket. It was not a burglar's instrument exactly, more the natural possession of a man who spent his life persuading small metal things to move. Within a minute, the lock clicked. The door opened inward. A smell of dust, damp velvet, and old wood breathed out from the darkness. They entered. The lantern light moved across peeling wallpaper, a cracked mirror, a cloakroom filled with empty hooks, a staircase covered in dust, no footprints, at least not recent ones. James held the lantern low. Then he saw them, marks in the dust, not footprints, lines, as though something had been dragged lightly across the floor. A small box, perhaps, or a folded chair. They followed the marks into the main theater. The auditorium opened before them like a sleeping creature. Rows of seats descended toward the stage. Above, the ceiling vanished into shadow. The balconies curved like dark wings. The stage curtain hung in ruins, heavy and faded red. Eleanor whispered, "It feels like everyone just left." James nodded. Old theaters remember applause longer than people do. They descended the aisle. The lantern light touched seat numbers. Third row, left side. James stopped. A small object rested on the seat. A white rose. Fresh. Eleanor lifted a hand to her mouth. Samuel murmured. Clara loved white roses. James examined the rose without touching it. The stem had been cut cleanly. This was not the work of a ghost, nor memory. A living person had placed it there recently. On the stage, something glimmered. James moved toward it. At center stage stood a music stand. On it lay a sheet of music, yellowed but preserved. At the top, written in faded ink, were the words, "The street where rain remembered." For Clara, beneath the title, was a small silver mark. James lifted the sheet carefully. Behind it, hanging from the music stand by a thin blue silk ribbon, was the locket. Eleanor made a sound, somewhere between relief and pain. She stepped forward, but James raised a hand gently. Not yet. He examined the floor. Dust had been cleared around the stand. Someone had stood here recently. He looked at the locket. Silver, oval, roses engraved around the edge. A tiny winding key on the side. He touched it with a handkerchief and lifted it from the ribbon. It was warm, not from the room, from being held. James opened it. Inside were two photographs. A young Clara Bellamy, a young Thomas Ashford, but there was also something else. A folded scrap of paper hidden behind the second photograph. James removed it carefully. Eleanor watched him unfold it. The message inside was written in Clara's hand. "Thomas, if ever this reaches you, know that I heard the song, not with my ears. Arthur would not allow that, but I heard it in memory, and memory was enough. Do not let grief make you bitter. Do not let love become a locked room. If Eleanor ever finds this, tell her I was happy to be her mother. Tell her that every life contains more than one love, and none of them cancels the others. Tell her I chose, and I wondered, and I regretted, and I was grateful. That is what it means to live. Clara. Eleanor began to cry, silently. Samuel turned away. James folded the note with great care, but before he could speak, a sound came from above. A board creaked in the balcony. Samuel raised the lantern. Who's there? Silence. Then a figure moved behind the railing. A woman, not young, not old, dressed in a dark coat with a pale blue scarf. James did not move. Come down, he said calmly. You have done enough hiding for one night. The woman stood still, then slowly descended the side stairs. Her face was lined and tired, but her eyes were steady. Eleanor stared at her. Mrs. Harrow? James looked at Eleanor. You know her? She cleans the shop twice a week. Mrs. Harrow stopped at the foot of the stairs. Her hands were clasped before her. I am sorry, Miss Bellamy. Eleanor's voice shook. You took it? Yes. Why? Mrs. Harrow looked toward the stage. Because your father asked me to. James's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. Arthur Bellamy is dead. Yes, she said, and before he died, he gave me instructions. Samuel stepped forward. What instructions? Mrs. Harrow opened a worn handbag and removed a small packet of papers. He said that one day, Thomas Ashford might return. If he did, and if Miss Eleanor was ready, I was to move the locket. Move it where? James asked. To Mr. Vale first, then to Mr. Ashford, then here. James understood. A trail. Yes. Eleanor stared at her. My father planned this? Mrs. Harrow nodded. He was too ashamed to tell you while he lived, too proud, too afraid. But near the end, he changed. He wanted the truth to reach you gently. Gently? Eleanor's voice broke. You stole my mother's locket. I know. You frightened me. I know. Mrs. Harrow lowered her head. I almost did not do it, but your father said that if the locket was simply handed to you with a letter, you might lock it away as he had done. He said mystery would make you follow it. And if you followed it, perhaps you would understand it. James looked at the blue scarf around her neck. Pale blue silk. She touched it. It belonged to Clara. She gave it to me when I worked as a girl in the shop. And the lavender oil? Clara's scent. I placed a drop on the box. So Eleanor would know her mother was part of this. Mrs. Harrow nodded. I thought it would comfort her. I see now it frightened her instead. Eleanor looked down at the locket in James's hand. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. How did you open the rosewood box? Your father gave me a duplicate key. Eleanor closed her eyes. Of course he did. James stepped closer. Mrs. Harrow, there remains one question. She looked at him. Why tonight? Mrs. Harrow swallowed. Because Mr. Ashford is dying. The words settled heavily. Eleanor turned toward her. How long? Not long. The doctor says days, perhaps a week. Samuel removed his spectacles. Mrs. Harrow continued. Your father's final instruction was that Thomas should hear the melody before he died, and that Clara's daughter should know the whole truth before the song ended forever. Eleanor looked at the stage, at the old sheet music, at the white rose, at the locket, and slowly the anger in her face loosened. It did not disappear. Forgiveness rarely arrives all at once, but something in her began to understand. James handed her the locket. This time, she took it. It rested in her palm, silver and small, yet carrying more than any object should have been able to carry. "Does it still play?" she whispered. Samuel stepped forward. "If the mechanism has survived." Eleanor looked at James. He nodded. She wound the tiny key. Once, twice, 3 times. Then the locket began to play. Softly, the melody floated into the empty theater. A few notes, gentle, wistful, like rain remembering a street it had once loved. The music trembled through the old hall. It touched the torn curtain, the sleeping balconies, the dusty seats, the place where Clara had once sat in the 3rd row, left side. And for one brief moment, Ember Hall did not feel abandoned. It felt full of all the evenings that had gone, all the applause that had faded, all the people who had loved and lost and chosen and regretted. Eleanor closed her eyes. Mrs. Harrow wept quietly. Samuel Vale stood very still, and James Holmes, who had spent his life listening for truth in small sounds, understood that he had found it now. Not in a confession, not in a clue, but in music. They returned to Thomas Ashford's room before dawn. The rain had stopped. A pale blue light touched the windows of London. The city was not yet awake, but it was beginning to think about waking. Chimneys breathed smoke. Milk carts rattled faintly in the distance. The Thames moved beneath its bridges like a long, dark ribbon loosening into morning. Thomas was still in his chair by the window when they entered. He looked at Eleanor's face, then at the locket in her hand. He did not speak. Eleanor crossed the room and knelt beside him. "I found it," she said. Thomas closed his eyes. "Clara?" Eleanor took his thin hand. "No, Eleanor." He opened his eyes again, confused for a moment, then aware. "Yes, forgive me. There is nothing to forgive. There is always something." She placed the locket in his palm. "My mother left you a letter." Thomas looked at it as though it were a candle in a dark room. James gave him the folded note. His hands shook too much to open it, so Eleanor read it aloud. Slowly, gently, when she reached the words, "Do not let love become a locked room." Thomas covered his face. No one interrupted him. Some grief must be allowed to move through the room at its own pace. At last he lowered his head. Did she suffer? Eleanor hesitated, then answered truthfully, "Yes, but she was loved." Thomas nodded. "That is something. She wanted you to hear the melody," Eleanor said. "I have heard it every night for 30 years. In memory?" He smiled faintly. "Yes." Eleanor wound the locket. The music began. This time, in the small room by the river, it sounded different, less like a mystery, more like a farewell. Thomas leaned back and closed his eyes. As the melody played, James looked around the room. A violin case, a blue scarf, a small stack of letters tied with ribbon, a photograph of Ember Hall, a life built around one song. When the music ended, Thomas opened his eyes. "Miss Bellamy," he whispered. "Yes?" "Your mother laughed when she repaired things." Eleanor smiled through tears. "I remember. She used to say that broken things were never truly broken, only waiting for patience." Eleanor looked down at the locket. "I think she was right." Thomas turned his gaze toward the window. Morning had begun to silver the rooftops. "Mr. Holmes?" he said. James stepped closer. "Yes? Was it a crime? The locket?" "All of it," James considered. A detective must be careful with such questions. Law has one answer. Life often has another. "At first glance," he said, "one might call it theft." Thomas smiled faintly. "And at second glance?" "At second glance, it was an old man's attempt to repair what he had broken before death made repair impossible." Thomas closed his eyes. "That sounds like Arthur." Eleanor held his hand. "My father was wrong," she said, "but he tried." "Yes," Thomas whispered. "In the end, trying is not nothing." Silence rested over them. Outside, London stirred. A cart passed below. Somewhere, a church bell rang 6 times. Thomas opened his eyes once more. "Would you leave the locket with me today?" Eleanor looked at it, then placed it gently on the table beside him. "Yes, I will return it." "No," she said softly. "You will keep it until you are done listening." Thomas looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "Clara would have liked you." Eleanor smiled. "She made me." 3 days later, Thomas Ashford died peacefully in his chair beside the window. The locket was found resting in his hand. It had stopped playing, not broken, simply unwound. Eleanor buried him in a small cemetery not far from her mother's grave. Only a few people attended: Samuel Vale, Mrs. Harrow, the landlady, James Holmes, and Eleanor herself. There was no grand speech, no newspaper notice, no crowd of admirers, just a soft morning wind moving through the trees, and a small silver locket shining briefly beneath the gray sky before Eleanor closed it in her palm. She did not bury it with Thomas. Some things belong to the living, not because the living own them, but because they still have lessons to learn from them. After the burial, Eleanor walked with James through the cemetery path. Autumn leaves gathered along the stones. The rain had left droplets on the iron fence. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Eleanor said, "Was my mother unhappy?" James looked ahead. "I do not think happiness is a single room either." She gave a faint smile. "No? No. I think it is a house with many windows, some bright, some dark, some open, some closed forever." Eleanor thought about this. "My father loved her." "Yes." "And Thomas loved her." "Yes." And she loved them both, in different ways. Eleanor looked down at the locket. "Is that allowed?" James smiled gently. Life rarely asks permission. They walked a little farther. "What should I do with it?" she asked. "The locket?" "Yes." "What do you wish to do?" "I don't know." "Then do nothing yet. Important objects deserve a little silence before we decide their future." She nodded. I may place it in the shop window. Not locked away? No, not locked away. James looked pleased. That would be wise. And perhaps, she added, I will repair music boxes. You know how? My mother taught me. I had forgotten. James glanced at her. Perhaps the locket has already begun its work. 1 week later, Blackthorn Street looked different. Not greatly. The fog still came. The rain still gathered in silver lines between the stones. The watch repairer still lit his lamps early. The tailor still forgot to sweep his doorstep. The bookshop still closed at 7, though customers knocked until past. But in the window of Bellamy and Sons, something new had appeared. A small velvet stand. Upon it rested a silver locket engraved with roses. Beside it, written in Eleanor's careful handwriting, was a little card. Not for sale. A family memory. Plays a song called The Street Where Rain Remembered. People stopped to look. Some smiled. Some leaned closer. Some asked Eleanor about it, and sometimes she told them the short version. Sometimes the long one. And sometimes, when the shop was quiet and the rain fell softly outside, she wound the tiny key and let the melody play. Samuel Vale came by every Thursday with tea. Mrs. Harrow continued cleaning twice a week, though Eleanor no longer allowed her to polish the locket. Not yet. Forgiveness, like repair work, requires patience. James Holmes returned once 2 months later to purchase a broken pocket watch he had seen in the corner of the shop. Eleanor wrapped it in brown paper. Do you intend to repair it? She asked. No, James said. Then why buy it? He looked at the package. Because some broken things remind us to be careful with time. Eleanor smiled. That sounds like something my mother would have said. Then I shall consider it a compliment. Before he left, she called after him. Mr. Holmes? He turned. Did you know from the beginning that Mrs. Harrow had taken it? No. But you suspected? I suspected nearly everyone. That seems unkind. It is, but I do it gently. She laughed. It was the first time James had heard her laugh. It sounded, he imagined, very much like Clara. Outside, the evening had settled. Blackthorn Street glowed softly beneath its gas lamps. James stepped into the rain. He paused once to look back at the shop window. The locket caught the light. Small, silver, quiet, no longer hidden, no longer lost. And as James Holmes walked away through the soft London fog, he thought of all the things people lock away. Letters, songs, names, regrets, forgiveness. He thought of Arthur Bellamy, who had been jealous and afraid, yet had still tried to set the truth free. He thought of Thomas Ashford, who had loved a woman for a lifetime without demanding that the past become anything other than what it was. He thought of Clara, who had understood that a heart may contain more than one room. And he thought of Eleanor, who had inherited not only a locket, but a story. The rain fell gently. The city breathed. Somewhere behind him, faintly, almost too soft to hear, a few notes of music drifted from the shop window. The street where rain remembered. James did not turn back. Some mysteries end best when left behind in warm light. He walked on through the rain, past the watchmaker's window, past the bookshop, past the sleeping carriages and the dim lamps and the streets that curved toward morning. And London, old and patient, kept its secrets. Not all of them, only the ones that were not yet ready to be found. Years later, people on Blackthorn Street still spoke of the locket. Children pressed their noses against the glass of Bellamy and Sons and asked whether it was magic. Eleanor would smile and say, "Not exactly." But when they asked if it had ever been lost, she would say yes. And when they asked how it was found, she would say, "By listening." That was all, because that was the truth. James Holmes solved many cases in his life. Some involved stolen jewels. Some involved forged letters. Some involved clever criminals who believed themselves far cleverer than they were. But the case of the lost locket remained one he remembered with unusual fondness. Not because it had been difficult, though parts of it had been. Not because it had made him famous. It did not. No newspaper wrote about it. No police report recorded it. No judge ever heard the name Thomas Ashford. James remembered it because it had reminded him that the past is not dead wood. It is more like a music box. Closed, perhaps. Dusty, perhaps. Silent for years. But somewhere inside, if handled gently enough, the mechanism remains. A small key, a little patience, and the old song begins again. So if ever you find yourself walking through London on a rainy evening, and you pass a narrow street where the lamps glow gold in the fog, and you hear, from the window of an antique shop, a tiny melody drifting through the rain, pause for a moment. Listen. Perhaps it is only a locket. Perhaps it is only an old tune. Or perhaps it is the sound of something once lost, finding its way home. And now, as the rain continues softly over Blackthorn Street, as the clocks tick gently in the warm little shop, as the silver locket rests beneath the glow of the window lamp, we will leave James Holmes to his quiet walk through London, and Eleanor Bellamy to her mother's song. The mystery has ended. The city has grown still, and somewhere in the soft spaces between memory and sleep, the music plays on. So close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let the night gather gently around you, because these are the stories that tuck you in.